So Al Lee Worthington, as I mentioned, author of Breaking Bad, the subtitle, How to Find Peace and Purpose in a World of Crazy, has what I suspect is a familiar story. She talks about her story a little bit, actually throughout the book, but especially in this chapter, her relationship. It is a story of boy meets girl on a blind date, believe it or not, and she knew from the first time she met him, she said in the book, her husband, Mark, that she was going to marry him. Love at first sight. Now, I don't know if that's a familiar story or not, but it seems it's very movie-based, right? They get married, and they have it all. The home of their dreams with the white picket fence and a happy life in the home state that she loved so much. She wrote, in fact, in her book this. She said, "My massive pride was planted on the mantle of the home Mark and I had built. And let me tell you, when your pride is as big as mine was, there's pretty much only one direction to go." And as you can maybe guess, that direction for her life at that pinnacle was nothing but down. She says that Mark lost his job, they lost their house to foreclosure, and what little bit they had they were able to keep ended up being put in 2 rented storage containers. And so they had to go through this agonizing process. And so I posed the question that they had to face: what stays and what goes? If you had to go through your home and narrow it down to just a storage container or maybe 2, what would you keep and what would go? Now, we don't have time right now for you to think that all the way through, but I want you to think about that. Speaking of that, if you want notes for this sermon, unfortunately I should have thought to tell you this before, but don't feel rude if you want to, but at the back of the sanctuary there are sermon notes for this, or just jot these questions on the back of your bulletin there somewhere, and I want you to think about it. What would you keep and what would go? These are what I'm calling clarifying moments. Allie wrote this about that clarifying moment in her life. She said, "The clothes that I spent so much money on were given away, and the box of toys that would help the boys feel more secure in the turbulent transition were kept. The expensive appliances were donated, and the photo albums stayed. The crystal wine glasses were given away, and the glider rocker that I rocked and nursed my babies in over the last decade remained." Clarity. Moments like they experienced and others in our lives bring to us clarity, or so we hope. We have to get down to the real business of deciding what's important in life. Sometimes clarifying moments come without our invitation or intent. The loss of a job like Allie and Mark, a life-altering medical diagnosis, a relationship that ends, a natural disaster that alters everything. And sometimes, though, we invite those clarifying moments in as we take inventory of our lives and we decide something's gotta change. What I have loved, especially as I've noticed it over the last few months of ministry here, is Pastor Becky and I, and I don't know if it's so much by intent necessarily, like we sat and really talked about it, but just by those clarifying experiences, we've begun to really do everything that we can to make more connections with you in your lives, to spend more time sitting down and getting to know you and learning more about your lives. And as I've done that, I've learned so much more about what those clarifying moments in your life either historically have been, or sometimes some of those clarifying moments that they're happening right now in your life. I hear you talk about how you see that your family situation is changing. Your kids are growing up way too quickly and you're afraid you're going to lose it, and so you make major career changes. I hear you talk about how the health situation is changed in your life and it's caused you to really reassess how it is that you spend your time and your money. These clarifying moments, whether they come by invitation or by life's circumstance, they cause us to pause and to ask, what's important? However they happen, clarifying moments help us understand more clearly what Jesus was getting at, I think, when he said in the scriptures from Matthew chapter 6, as it's recorded, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Worthington wrote in her book, she said, "God showed me the beauty in the ashes of my life when her life absolutely and utterly changed. She didn't have any choice about it, and her life was left in what she felt for a while were ashes. But God allowed me," she said, "to see it was not something that I strived for, that gave me real peace and purpose and happiness. It wasn't the stuff, but it was the relationships that I had. The relationships that helped me know that I was loved, and the relationships with whom I loved." Why? Because she says love is greater than possessions. What a lesson. I could end it right there, but let us continue. Psych. Connecting in our relationship, she goes on in her book and writes with the three F's, or she doesn't necessarily call it that, but that's the way that I look at it. And so the first one was connecting with God, she says, and then with family and friends. So that it works, I've called that faith, family, and friends. I often say in my own ministry that if people have the three F's that are vital relationships, that they can accomplish and overcome anything: faith, family, and friends. And I have worked with folks, I've counseled with people through the 20 plus years of my ministry, and I have seen that if people are struggling in life to make their way, it's often because they are lacking in one of or all three of these areas. So often, those folks that I counsel with that are absolutely at the bottom of their life, they've lost everything: no job, no home, no prospects, no sense of future, no identity. Oftentimes, I'll find it's because they miss all three of these things, whether by their own actions or, again, by life. Faith. God calls us into that relationship with God. Sometimes we Christians forget how special it is that we can have a relationship as close, as real, and as personal with God. Allie writes that in her book. Faith in God can be nurtured and must be nurtured in our lives, and she talks about these three things: through prayer, through study, and through worship. And I appreciate that because it really kind of goes right along with what we talk about here on our pathway of discipleship, the 4 E's that you've heard us say so often: to engage people or encounter people so that we can engage them in a relationship with Christ, that they can be equipped in their relationship as they grow, and that they can be empowered by the Holy Spirit then to serve. So the prayer is that empowerment, the study is that equipping, and the worship is then the ways in which we engage in our life and our walk with God. You see, Jesus reminds us that he too was so focused on the priority to connect with God and to grow in his own faith journey, that he made the time, that he took the time and time again. The Gospels record how these incidents of Jesus making time to pray, healing a leper as he did afterward. It's recorded in Luke chapter 5 right here. It says, "But now, more than ever, the word about Jesus spread abroad. Many crowds were gathered to see him and to be cured of their diseases. But look what Jesus did. He withdrew to a deserted place to pray." You see, if we're going to break busy, just like Jesus, he could have very easily been overwhelmed by the busy pace of what the world demanded of him and what he wanted to do in his ministry and what people were clamoring for him to do. Always out there, reaching, touching, healing, talking, sharing. And yet he withdrew and prayed in a private place. When Jesus' parents lost him and frantically searched for him when he was a young boy. Upon finding him in the temple, he said to them these famous words that we remember, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" He was there in the worship experience, not always out in the world. Yes, he would often go out into the world, walk the streets, visit the cities, see the people, but he made time to worship. And that's important for us. If we see that it was the vital asset of Jesus' faith walk, then why shouldn't we think it ours? But the reality is sometimes life gets busy. I got to tell you, sometimes when my schedule overwhelms me for the clamor of all that needs to get done, I find that one of the things that often suffers first is my prayer life. If you ask any staff member or anybody who serves in the church, any pastor or others, they'll probably tell you something similar, at least until they learn the lesson otherwise. And I share that with you as an honest confession to let you know that when those moments come in your life and you make those same decisions, those same mistakes, let's call it for what it is, I want you to know you're not alone. But that doesn't mean that that has to be the way that it is, that we can change that we can begin to move to make that difference, that we can be conscious about knowing what is important and have clarifying moments. And these are the places where we then begin to understand what God calls us to when he says, "When you are weary and burdened, come to me and there find rest." Burdened by the responsibilities and the difficulties of life, and there, come and find rest. Jesus knew it, and he continually teaches us, and hopefully we can learn from today. The other thing that Allie talks about then is building relationships with those that are important as well. Faith, her relationship with God, and then she lists second, family for her. Her spouse, her kids, and her extended family. And she sees how important it is. And I love how she talks about this. And this is really what we see in the scriptures today. As Paul writes to Timothy, who he's mentoring, he knows that one of the ways that Timothy is really even introduced at all to the faith is because of his mother and his grandmother. That his faith journey began with his grandma. And it was nurtured by his mom. And I don't think it's by accident that we see the significance of the women of faith in Timothy's life. Now, that doesn't mean that it was only left to them, but you know, the unfortunate reality is that that's true for us in our faith journeys, at least in the life of the church. Churches across this nation, including ours, are so often occupied more by the women of the families than they are by the men. But one of the things that I remember sitting in the pew on Sunday morning in the little Baptist church in Argenna that I grew up in, and I would lay there bored out of my mind because the pastor, like me, was droning on and on about stuff. But you know, one of the first memories that I have is laying there with my head on my dad's belly. He had a good one. It was nice and soft and comfy. And I would lay there with my head on my dad's belly, and they would sing those hymns. And my dad had a deep bass. He has a deep bass voice, kind of like mine. And he would sing the bass. Didn't matter what key it was in or what he would always just sing the bass because that's where he was at. And he would sing the bass. "Oh, Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder," you know. Just those great old hymns, and my head would be laying there on his stomach with my ear to his belly, and I would just hear the echo of his voice resounding in his chest and through his stomach, and I have that memory forever seared into my mind. And it was a beautiful thing, and that's where my faith journey really in many ways began. in that little church and hanging out as part of the RAs. That's a group called Royal Ambassadors, kind of like Boy Scouts in the Baptist church. And Scott Brandon and my dad leading that group, and us kids hanging out and learning all kinds of wonderful things. And my mom walking me up to the front of the church whenever it was my birthday. And there was a little white church that had a steeple on it with a slot in the top where you drop your offering in for your birthday offerings. And Mom would walk me up there, and I'd drop my offering in, and then they'd sing happy birthday to me. These moments are opportunities for us to grow and to learn. In the Gospel of Mark, chapter 3, we read this, that his mother and his brothers came, and standing outside, they sent to him and called, and a crowd was sitting around Jesus, and they said to Jesus, "Jesus, your mother and your brothers, they're outside seeking you." And Jesus then answered them, saying, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" And looking about at those who were around him, sitting in that circle with him, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and my sister and my mother." And there are those folks in my faith experience as well. I look back and I see my Sunday school teachers like Virginia who guided me, and those men who have been a great influence in my life, like Halsey when I was a student pastor in D-Land. And Halsey was there in that church every morning, even before me, and he would unlock the church and he would write on the bulletin board what the weather was for the day, so when we knew if the attendance was up or down. If it was down and the clouds were set in and the rain had poured, we could blame it on the weather. Definitely not the preacher. And there are those all throughout the journey, in Wes and John and Simon and Peter, not the ones in the Bible, but others in my life. I can name them one after the other, those folks who became like family to me and shared their walk in faith and became in relationships those who nurtured me. And I hope, friends, you have those same folks. And I hope you have those same experiences in your life, that family, your children, that you invest in that time to teach them the faith as my dad and my parents did, and my grandparents, as Timothy's grandmother and mother did for him. And I give so much thanks for those among our community here who are doing that every day. And then she finishes with talking about friends, relationships with friends. There's a study that she says that shows that our circle of close friends and confidants is rapidly declining. That 80% of the people that they talked to talk only to family members about important matters. And that 15% of the people have 4 or 5 close confidants. 15. Only 15. 85% of us don't really have many people that we can call close. And that's why, shameless promotion time, I can't wait to share with you and start the opportunities that we have with our Sunday Night Life, SNL. Because in these places we're talking about life groups and about the opportunities for us to connect deeply with others who become companions on the faith journey and confidants in the storms of life with us. And we hope that you have those. And I know I speak to many of you who have Sunday school groups that you've been with, or your small groups that you've been meeting with, whether it's on a Tuesday morning or a Wednesday afternoon or a Thursday night, and you're journeying with them and you're learning about them. And I've appreciated that. I've had an opportunity, as I said recently, to go and visit a lot of people in our community and sit in your homes and hear your stories and learn more about you. Learn about one of you who was a child of 5, whose father died very young, and his mother was poor enough that she couldn't raise you, so you and all of your siblings had to go to an orphanage and be raised by somebody else. Those of you who've spent years, careers being built in the military, and who've traveled all over, who've lived in 27 different homes in the 33 years of your service, and who've seen your children born and raised in different places around this country and all over the world. Family members who've lost loved ones. Those of you, I said, drink a cup of coffee with and ask the deep questions. Why? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why couldn't this cancer be my burden to bear and not my grandchild's, who's so young and has so much life yet to live, and mine's almost done? I hear these stories, and they're your stories. And friends, I sit here or stand before you as you sit here today and say to you, you all have a story. And I hope that I'll get a chance to learn all of them. I probably won't. I think if Pastor Becky and I went to every one of your homes every day for the next several years, we still wouldn't get them all. But you can. Know each other's stories. Build those relationships. Connect in real ways, because love is greater than possessions. What is it that we spend our time and our money on? What is it that we would keep when it really came down to those clarifying moments? My hope is that this sermon today, this opportunity, this journey through breaking busy together will be that clarifying place for us, where we're asking the questions, what's most important? Where do I invest my time and my energy and my efforts and my money? Allie would say, hopefully it's relationships. Because in order for us to break busy, to find peace and purpose in this world, the best way for us to do that is just what Jesus said are the most important things. To love God with all that we are, and to love each other just as God loves us. That's my hope and prayer for us in this walk. Because Paul finished that story with Timothy with the powerful words that I think we need to hear again. And I've got them right at the very front. For the Spirit of God that is given to us does not make us timid, but gives us power. Power to love and to be disciplined. So I pray that you'll spend this week just seeking what is it that I need to be disciplined about, and making those choices and clarifying what's most important. Let me pray for you.